First up is Charles Rankin. He's retired editor-in-chief of the University of Oklahoma Press, former Montana Historical Society Publications Director. He holds a PhD in history in the University of New Mexico and is the editor or co-editor of 4 books, most recent of which is Towards a More Perfect Union, the Civil War Letters of Frederick and Elizabeth Walkley. I'm going to hand it over to John.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeff has the hook, so I've got to be very careful about time and like that. He mentioned travel is one of the kind of undercurrent themes for the conference. I'm glad to see that. Kirby talked about unknown people in Montana history, and I thought I would introduce you to one. He was well known at the time, but he's not well known today. John Axline talked about cemeteries. I'll be talking a little bit about that. Nina Sanders talked about the Bighorn Mountains. We'll be talking about that a little bit. And not crows, but Lakotas and that kind of thing for briefly. Can you hear me okay? Okay. When remembered at all, James Hamilton Mills is considered an important newspaperman in Montana territorial history. He was Secretary of State for the territory in the 1880s. He edited the New Northwest, a newspaper published out of Deer Lodge. It was an influential newspaper in its day. He was a Union veteran of the Civil War. He was a staunch Republican, the party of Lincoln. As a Union veteran, he also served as Adjutant General of Montana's militia during the Nez Perce War of 1877. He was really basically the eyes and ears for Governor Benjamin Hans. He interviewed James Shively, who was taken prisoner by the Nez Perce as they moved through Yellowstone National Park. He was their prisoner for about 10 days and then he escaped. And right after that, he gave an interview to Mills, who then published it in his newspaper, the New Northwest. And that's the starting point for all the research that's been done on where the Nez Perce went in Yellowstone. What Mills is not remembered for is having been a Bozeman Trail diarist. His diary seems to have remained undisturbed in a Hollinger box in the Montana Historical Society for the last 50 years. His descendants donated it there in 1977. I found it while researching something else entirely. He has about 20 diaries in the Montana Historical Society collections. Most of them are from late in life, and they are eminently uninteresting. I got up at 7 today. I went down to the store today, saw my daughter today, went to the doctor, that kind of thing. And then I was looking at his Civil War diaries, and they are pretty much the same way. But in folder 4 was his Bozeman Trail diary. Now, I don't know how many of you might be aware of Susan Badger Doyle, who I worked with, and her 2-volume Journeys to the Land of Gold, which is a collection of Bozeman Trail diaries. She went from coast to coast looking for them. She missed this one. She was aggravated with the fact when I told her. Mills intended to go to California, but once as far as Omaha, he decided to travel with a small train to Montana. He hoped to make a stake in the gold fields and return to start anew in his native Pennsylvania. Actually, he was a native of New Lisbon, Ohio, but his family moved to Pittsburgh when he was 4 years old. He left Omaha in May, and he arrived in Helena in August. With some associates, he tried, let's see, I have to have several hands here. This is, I showed you the older James Hamilton Mills. This is the younger, obviously, probably a picture taken in the early 1860s. Once he arrived in Helena, he found it kind of dull there. And so he went with a bunch of his buddies that he had come with to Immigrant Gulch to try hydraulic mining. They were all set, but they ran out of supplies, so they pooled their money and gave it to one of the packers to go into Bozeman and get supplies. Unfortunately, the packer gambled it all away and disappeared into the Netherlands and like that. So he was broke. So he went down to let's see. Oh well, that's all right. He went down to Virginia City. I thought that was the slide that I had next, but nonetheless, gold was plentiful, as you know, in Virginia City in 1866, but he didn't find any there either. But he did find newspapering. Found paying work on the Montana Post, probably Montana's most famous newspaper. This is his diary, and the diary is the exact size of an iPhone mini. That's exactly what it looks like. He used a soft lead pencil to write with, no doubt sharpening it with a knife, because some of his writing is very clear, and his strokes are thin, and then other times they're quite flat and kind of smeary, and that's like that. But it has not been, probably hasn't been handled a whole lot because it is not smeared. He, along the way, oh, now I've got Virginia City. Okay, I have them in the wrong order. Anyway, this is the diary, and as you can see it, I keyboarded it. It's about 50 pages altogether, and it's virtually every day, a little bit of what he did, and he actually is interesting as it goes along. There are some stories. He would also make, see if I can, there we go. He would do sketches, and there are a number of sketches in the diary itself. Remember, the diary is only this big. So, you know, the detail here is not too bad. Like other immigrant diarists, Mills recorded miles traveled, rough terrain, especially stream crossings, the weather, irritating mosquitoes and other insects, the food, which always got worse. Surprise events and marvels. He also commented on a variety of animals, especially big animals as he got farther west. Economic potential of the land, or how barren it was. And he loved to comment on his fellow travelers, which makes some really interesting reading. His party numbered 21 people, including 9 Civil War veterans, all Unionists like himself. Mills had fought with the 11th Pennsylvania Reserves, known as the Bloody 11th. It had fought at Antietam, Gettysburg, the Wilderness, and other major battles. They were mustered out at the end of a 3-year term in July of 1864. Like so many other Civil War veterans, Mills foundered in the East. He just couldn't find a paying career, so he decided to go west. His Bozeman Trail group included 3 women, 2 in their 30s and 1 very newly married at tender age of 16, 14 men and 3 children. They initially traveled up the north side of the Platte River. Let's see. Now, if I can, okay, over here, if I can see, Omaha's around here somewhere. I'd have to read. Anyway, coming up the north side of the trail, this is Fort Laramie here, and then the Bozeman Trail comes up through Wyoming, basically following I-25 to I-90, and then over before it quite gets to Billings. Billings wasn't there yet, but nonetheless follows the Yellowstone Valley up, and then of course Montana or Helena's up here. And eventually he came down to Virginia City. He paid $75 to join the train and $1 a day for food. He was an outsider, or rather an outrider, and a hunter. he was a terrible hunter. When you read his diary, he spent $240 on his outfit, which included a pony that he very poetically named Pony, saddle, blankets, rubber coat, tent, rifle, ammunition, knife, boots, shirt, valise, and 5 pounds of tobacco. He would need a second pair of boots when the Indians stole his pony. He made about 20 miles a day. Most Sundays they rested, at least for a half a day. Whatever their religious convictions of others, Mills was nonchalant. Laid by today and rested, he wrote on June 3rd, a Sunday. Whether we kept it holy or not is another question. Some washed, some bathed, some mended and played cards and checkers. What Mills did that day, he didn't record, but on other days, he said he chased buffalo and wrote letters home, some of which went to his hometown newspaper in Pittsburgh. Serene Sundays didn't keep them from arguing about the food, however. Some of the party think that we do not fare quite so well as we might under the circumstances, he wrote on June 1st. Our bill of fare runs as follows: breakfast, coffee, fat pork, flat biscuit, cold, and water. Dinner, which was midday, sorghum, cold pork, flat biscuit, cold, and water. Supper, tea, flat pork, flat biscuit, burnt hominy, and sorghum. With a perceptible sigh, he added, I'm not dyspeptic, neither am I dainty, but I could stand a slight variation in diet. Still, when he saw a mule train headed back to Omaha, he wrote, I could not make the trip back for any consideration less than a fortune. He did make sketches of some of his companions. This is O.D. Akuwin, a fellow traveler, an unpredictable fellow with a wild streak who snored and sang in his sleep. He may have traveled the Oregon Trail in 1850. He's recorded as O.D. Akuwin, probably as I'm guessing a teenager with his father. Other illustrations included Chimney Rock, which he likened to a Washington monument one day and to an inverted funnel the next. Nothing fascinated him like Indians. And this is another picture of supposedly more of a close-up, but nonetheless, you can see Fort Laramie down here, and then the dotted, the dashed line up and then over to Bozeman and Virginia City is the trail that he's traveling. Their first meeting with Indians came on the 14th of June, just southeast of Fort Laramie. Watching outriders from another party, he noted other objects on the distant bluffs. He thought them buffalo, but soon realized they were Indians. Mounted on horses, ponies, and mules, they were a varied assembly of Sioux Indians, men, women, and children. A wiry-looking man, he said, on an ancient mule, reined up and gave a how-do, Mills said. He was dressed in a number 5 artillery coat, blue leggings made up the Mexican style. The man produced a paper that said he was a peaceable Indian named Billy. When we agreed with him, Mills said, he smiled all over his face. Billy was soon joined by others, and they, as subsequent encounters with other Lakotas and some Cheyennes, wanted to trade, especially for Pony. He recorded, I'm afraid some of them will admire Pony to my sorrow, which they indeed did. This is a picture of Fort Laramie. Remember, he was traveling the trail in 1866, which was the most dangerous year for immigrant travel on the Bozeman Trail. It was a trail that immigrants did travel only 3 years, 1863 to 66. So this is what Fort Laramie would have looked like. And this is Old Bedlam, for those of you who have been there. It's restored now, but it was built in the 1850s, called Old Bedlam because it was a quarters for the unmarried officers. So you can imagine. This is a picture of the landscape 1867 of Fort Laramie. Oops. Let's see. There we go. Here's basically Old Bedlam here. What I wanted to draw your attention to was the old cemetery there, which was it was not a square, it was a trapezoid. On many illustrations, it looks like a triangle, but nonetheless, it was over here. Eventually, a new hospital would replace that cemetery. Now, he arrived at Fort Laramie on June 24th. He made his most notable sketch that day, a rendering of the scaffold burial of Spotted Tail's daughter, Mni Akuwin. Spotted Tail, as many of you know, was a major chief of the Brule Sikangu Lakota tribe. He and Red Cloud would be at Fort Laramie in June to discuss with authorities safe passage on the Bozeman Trail. Mills made this sketch for his diary, and you can see it's relatively small, but let's see, I've blown it up here. And her funeral took place in March, only 3 months earlier. As I'll show you here in a minute, the next illustration rendering of her scaffold burial is from the 1880s. And none of these things that he included in his sketch were there by then. In fact, her remains were not even there. But I want to point out that there was this berm behind the fence in the corner of the cemetery. The story is quite well known in the annals of Wyoming when she actually died on the Powder River in Montana, and Spotted Tail brought her down to the fort. And by way of either a travois or some sort of a conveyance, and pulled by her two favorite white ponies. Once they got here, then they cut the heads off of the two ponies and mounted them on these posts here. Are some people say it's 8 feet tall, some people say it's 10. The sources that I have from the Lakotas themselves say that they purposely made these supports 12 feet long, buried them 4 feet into the ground. So that would make it about 8 feet. Then her coffin is up here on the top with a red blanket and a buffalo. The horses' tails then are nailed to the back posts. And like that, Mills describes a very grassy area. And then along here, you can see daughter of Spotted Tail, Sioux Chief at Fort Laramie. When I opened the diary and saw this one, I thought, whoa, I know this story, or at least I thought I did. Which has gotten into a lot of other things. He says in his diary, she wanted to marry a white man at the fort. Old Spotty objected and took her on the war trail. Soon after she died, poisoned herself, it is supposed, and requested to be buried in the white man's burying ground. Permission was granted, and she was buried Indian fashion in the fort grounds. The body is wrapped in several blankets and placed in a large box, probably 8 by 5 by 3 feet in size, and elevated on posts, he says, some 10 feet high. A red blanket is neatly tacked over the box and then left to the sun and storm. On the 2 front posts was nailed the heads of her favorite ponies, and on the rear ones, their tails. The stench from them was almost stifling, and the green flies that feed on the matter exuding from the boxes swarmed in myriads, but I managed to make a sketch notwithstanding. The story of the girl has been told and retold for 150 years. On the surface, it's a simple story, but in reality, it's not at all. Spotted Tail, as I say, leader of the Brule, what we more often know as the Brule Lakotas, was camped on the Powder River, as I noted, over the winter of 65-66, which was a very severe winter. His favorite daughter, this was his favorite daughter, he took her everywhere. was severely ill. The Lakotas, like the Cheyennes, by that point had been on the war trail since 1864, since Sand Creek Massacre, and they wanted to come back. They wanted to go back into trading at Fort Laramie and that kind of thing. So they were interested in a peace treaty. This is Spotted Tail. In 1868, his photograph was made, I believe, by Gardner during the negotiations. During that, this is his wife, Bringswater. Her name also Mni Akuwin, which has led to all kinds of confusion because her daughter was by the same name. This picture was taken of her in 1872, so it gives you some idea of what she might have looked like. And this was another of her daughters taken in 1975. We have no picture of Mni Akuwin, but probably the resemblance would be fairly consistent. This is the only other image that we have of the scaffold itself. And as you can see, gone is the berm, the grass, the tails, the horses' heads, everything, and including her bones, because Spotted Tail came back to Fort Laramie in 1876 and retrieved them to take them back to Nebraska, although it is it's confusing exactly where she's buried even today. The Lakotas say that this is not her scaffold because that's sawn lumber that you see with the posts, and they would not have used that. So in any event, nonetheless, it is this picture that they have used in order to triangulate where the marker for her is today. There is a marker for Mni Akuwin at Fort Laramie. It's commemorated as when Spotted Tail brought her back. The commandant of the fort, Henry Maynadier, was a good friend of his, and he had known the girl. And so he, 5 minutes? And her request was to be buried in the white man's cemetery. And so he granted that. And the Maynadier and Spotted Tail descendants came together in the early 2000s. And by 2005, they had convinced the National Park Service to create a memorial for her. And so that is at Fort Laramie today. As you can see, they have installed a bench, and that's relatively new so that people can come and actually contemplate. There is an in-ground vault over here, which contains a number of different things, including supposedly her ankle bone. That's another story I don't have time for. And this is the signage that they have created for it. This is what the signage, I know you can't read it, it's too small, but this is essentially is Spotted Tail, and this is Henry Maynadier. And it talks about reconciliation between red and white, essentially is the point. In 2005, they created the memorial. There were approximately 60 Maynadier descendants and some 200 of the Lakotas from the Rosebud Reservation came, including a contingent of Vietnam veterans. And this is the stone that sits on top of her grave. And then this is it. And as you can see, it has a number of things, not the least of which it depicts the original scaffold with the horses' heads and the tails, and then the circle of life for the Lakotas, the date and her name, Mni Akuwin, which and the name even has been controversial coming down. Okay. Henry Carrington came through in June, right before Mills was there, and of course he was with splendid, impeccable poor timing with 700 soldiers, and clearly he was going to build forts on the Bozeman Trail, and Red Cloud was not happy with that, which started Red Cloud's War, which made the 1866 year the most dangerous, and of course culminates in December with the Fetterman fight, That's Red Cloud. James Mills then recorded none of this in his diary. He had joined a larger train. As I say, he lost his pony in the Yellowstone crossing or Bighorn River crossing. Let's see, there we go. He met John Bozeman, who he regarded as very tall, about 30 years of age, rough and uncouth, looks whiskey burned and plays heavy. They went up the Yellowstone Valley to the Bridger Mountains, over into Bozeman, where there were about 8 to 10 houses. Too bad he didn't invest in real estate. And then essentially, as I say, he was broke and he got to Virginia City. When he went down to down there because of his newspaper writing and the exchange, W.D. Tilton, co-owner of the Virginia City's Montana Post, had seen some of Mill's articles and offered Mill the editor's job. Mills was the third editor on the Montana Post. This Henry Blake was the second editor. And of course, the first editor was probably one of Montana's most famous newspapermen was Thomas Dimsdale. Mills started there in December. Dimsdale had died in September, and Blake was only there for 4 months. And of course, he is the author of The Vigilantes of Montana. He said, I'd never been in a newspaper office in my life. He had little idea that he would make Montana his permanent home. The newspaper sanctum was not exactly opulent, simply a little place furnished with a chair and a pine table, he said, and the Campbell Power Press, which he had to lend a hand to on occasion. When his work was done, he spread his blankets on the editorial table and slept the sleep of the just and was paid $45 in gold dust a week for what he did. In 1868, he moved the paper to Helena. And for those of you on the front row, you might be able to see or are familiar with this picture. You can see it says Montana Post. Unfortunately, a lot of these buildings burned. They couldn't pay their subscription and advertising, so the newspaper had to fold, and so Mills moved to Deer Lodge, and they did beards really well in those days. He became editor of the New Northwest. He married Ella M. Hammond in 1875. They had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. When he died in 1904, his diaries went to his son, James H. Mills, Jr. His granddaughter made them available to Barbara Mills Graff, another granddaughter, and she donated them to the Montana Historical Society in 1977. Thank you very much.